We've been asked a question about the use of grids in the gCADPlus environment. There are two basic types of grid: an electronic grid, and I've got one operational here, and I'm looking at what will become a title block. And you'll notice down in the status line I've turned snap and grid on. It doesn't show at the moment because if I right click and go to drafting settings, my grid and snap step is half a unit, or half a millimeter in my design here. So if I zoom in, you might just be able to see, as I get right in, that my cursor is jumping from major grid point, where it is now, and then it goes click, 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 click to a major grid point. So it becomes very easy to draw on a grid. So I could draw a line from major grid point to major grid point, and down and back again. And quite often a grid such as that can be a useful design aid, so I'll just eliminate that. But what I've used the grid for here is to set things out neatly. My base point, or 0, 0 in this is a block, so the base of my block sits here. I'll start a line at coordinate 0, 0, that's 0 in the x and y, and you can see it starts down there. But if I select each one of these horizontal lines here, can you see if you look over in the properties box, they start at an x value of 2, a y value of 3.5, and they're 94 units long. And if I look at this line here, it's exactly the same, 94 units long. I've thickened it up just so that we can see it. So each piece of text, this piece of text has a height of 2.0, an x of 5.5, a minus value of -1, so it sits down slightly lower than the insertion point for the block, and that's deliberate. This piece of text here sits at a position x 5.5 and a y of 14.5. They're not whole numbers, but they're half units. So the whole of this grid is laid out on a series of half units. So I know that everything lines up. All of the text and all the lines are exactly the same, and everything clicks and locks into position. So I'm using a tiny grid there, but you could do exactly the same thing. Let's return to model space and return and close the block editor. We could return to the model space, and I'll click on the tab. Now we're in model space, nothing in here at the moment. By the way, I've deliberately set my background color to white. Let's just change it back to the more normal black. If I right click now and go to drafting settings, you can see there's our grid and snap. So we could set the grid back to the default of a 1 meter and a bold step every 5 meters, and we'll OK that. And if we zoom in, we should be able to see that grid, and I can just see it now. You might have some difficulty, but trust me, there is that grid there. So it's the same electronic grid that we've been using before, but just the size is different. But there is in gCADPlus, if you want to, you could use a grid. You could overlay a grid or design on a physical grid. So under Tools and Insert Grid Lines, we could say we want 10 horizontal lines and 10 vertical lines, each with a spacing of 1 meter. We've got control over all of these, and I'll show you what happens. We'll just put the grid down. Now my drawing color was red, and if we use the distance command and we simply click from, say, there across to there, we've got 9 meters, 10 meters to there. So there's a 1 meter grid, and you could put your snap settings on to, say, intersect and draw on top of that grid. So that's another way of using a grid in the gCADPlus environment. Maybe we'd better go back to a white background. So there's one type of grid, and you can see I've got things labelled as well, and you can have those labels showing or not, as you saw in the preamble to running. Another form of grid occurs when you go to polar. So there's polar tracking. Let's turn polar tracking on, and let's right click and go to drafting settings and go to polar tracking, and we could set a distance step, say for the sake of argument, now let's swing to say paving bricks that might be 400 millimeter paving bricks. We've got to say our distance step is 400. So we can go, okay, we'll zoom in here, we'll take off the snap and grid to the electronic grid, and we'll just draw a line. And you should see, as I move my mouse, it jumps 400, 800, 1200. There's a 1200 line and another 1200 line, and let's come back 800, up 400 and across and back. So I hope you see that's another style of grid. So we've got a number of different ways of using the grid function in the gCADPlus environment.